Hello everyone and welcome back to Canadians Abroad. I'm your host for today, Josh Deming. I will be joined by Peter Galindo and Alex Gangue-Ruzic, and we will be discussing some of the biggest storylines surrounding Canadian soccer, including what's next for Atiba Hutchinson, Cyle Larin remaining in La Liga, and Grosso potentially heading over to England. Plus a lot more, so hopefully you guys are excited, and if you are, let's get into the episode now. Alright, gentlemen, unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, and that is the case with Canadian legend Atiba Hutchinson, who, Alex, it looks like he is going to be retiring. He's 40 years old now. There's a little uncertainty about what his next step is. What would you like to see from Atiba in his next chapter?
Yeah, obviously, it was confirmed this week. Atiba Hutchinson has pretty much put it out himself via various reporters that are down in Vegas for the Nations League finals that, look, his club season or club career is done, and pretty much for Canada, it's Nations League, maybe Gold Cup, but probably Nations League is also seeming to be the end of the road for him. So now, you should have no shortage of options. Just looking down the list, Besiktas would obviously make a lot of sense given that he spent a decade there. His kids grew up there. He obviously is familiar with the language, the culture, could cut his teeth there. Of course, the Canadian men's national team, given that he's been with them for over 21 years, would also be a logical fit, potentially as a staff member to start. He could also go become an executive at Canada Soccer, with those two options being floated around by Andy Petrillo as very plausible options, as John Herdman's pushing for those options. Atiba Hutchinson is pondering those options. And lastly, Canadian clubs in MLS and the CPL would be foolish as well not to push. And he's interested in the domestic game. He obviously invested last year in League One Ontario's side, Simcoe County Rovers. So he has an eye on what's going on here and could be interested to come coach or be an executive in League One, in CPL, or even one of the Canadian MLS teams.
Now, Alex, you think it's 100% out of the question that player coach couldn't be an option? We know Atletico Ottawa was flirting with, Atiba a little bit. Do you think there's any chance whatsoever he could come and play a season in the CPL and then maybe go into coaching, or do you think it has to be coaching next for him?
Look, you could never close a door. He's a fit guy. He could be someone where you never know how you're going to respond to retirement. He does, he has a family, he has kids, so it might be a little easier for him than others. But look, you could be in that training environment. You could see that your touch isn't so bad. Your passes are still hitting the mark, and you could want to give it a go. But I'd probably say, given his family situation, I doubt it, but keep that door open, I suppose.
So, Peter, out of all the options that Alex was talking about there, which one would stick out to you and why?
I would love to see him coach on the national team as an assistant. I think that would be just the perfect transition for him, especially because when he leaves, that's going to fill a massive void in terms of the veteran leadership. Now, there are other guys who can step into that role, like Milan Borjan, like Jonathan Osorio, and a couple of others, of course. Even some of the younger players, I'm sure, are going to step up and take that mantle a bit. But having that player who has been through every single possible experience that you can think of with this program, and given how decorated he is, he's played at the highest level, all that put together would make him just the ideal person to have on the staff, just because the players can look towards him. He can give them a lot of guidance. We know how calm and composed he is out there. Maybe that translates to his coaching style. That is if he wants to obviously become a coach. Otherwise, a lot of the time, family reasons tend to come into play here. So whether his family is happy in Turkey and they want to stick around and he takes up an executive role with Besiktas or an ambassadorial role with Besiktas, that could also be an option. But selfishly, I think I would love to see him kind of continue with the national team, but in a coaching role.
I think so too, and it would be surprised me if that offer will come at some point, maybe not in the immediate future, but at some point, just of what he's given to this game. And before we move on, guys, let's just get a quick word about what Atiba has done for this program, because he's obviously been with his national team through the worst of the worst, and then obviously this incredible rise to the World Cup. And hopefully, at the time of recording, we are recording before the Nations League semifinal match against Panama, but hopefully a trophy. How beautiful. What a perfect ending to an incredible career if we were able to send Atiba out with a trophy. So, Peter, just a quick sentence or two on what he has meant to Canadian soccer.
It's really hard to do it in a sentence. All I can say is legend, and he'll never be forgotten. Everything he has done for this sport in this country, you can't even put any sort of value on it, and he's going to be sorely missed. Even though we all saw this coming for the last few years, it still hasn't quite sunk in. It's probably going to be a very emotional day, but absolutely, he helped pave the way for a lot of Canadian players, men and women, and I'm sure he can be very proud knowing that he leaves the sport knowing that it's in a better place in this country than when he first started in the sport.
Alex, anything you want to add to that?
I just say he's been the perfect national team player. Never missed a call, always was there, was a leader. Even when he was older and was frustrated and, he wanted to retire, he took that call from John Herdman, accepted it, and, look where it ended up bringing him, and he deserved everything that he got on that journey, the World Cup opportunity, and hopefully now it can end with a trophy.
Yeah, the future for Atiba is a little uncertain right now, but we know hopefully it will end up some way, shape, or form to leading back to Soccer Canada. But we're, cross our fingers. But another player whose future is a little bit uncertain as well is Cyle Larin, and that is because it seems that Valladolid will buy him for about 1.5 million euros, and then will immediately look to flip him. Now, the release clauses in La Liga are an interesting topic. I believe once he signs fully for Valladolid, he will have a release clause of about 40 million euros. That will not be the case if he is flipped. I've seen numbers along the lines of 5 million euros for clubs that could be interested in him. And I'll let you, Peter, get into it in a second, just around the rules of La Liga clubs and why there are release clauses. But I'm going to throw it to Alex after that, because there are some big clubs that are linked with Cyle Larin. You have Mallorca, Osasuna, Cadiz, and Getafe. So first off, Peter, I'm going to throw it to you. Just maybe a little context around the release clauses and why maybe La Liga has them.
Simply put, Spanish law. And that's the simplest way to say you have to put in release clauses into every single contract. Some might remember the odd negotiation with Barcelona contracts, and when Neymar had a certain release clause, PSG met it, and then they had no choice but to accept it. Now, it's not an automatic trigger. It's just something you have to put into the contract. So even though Larin's release clause, quote unquote, is 40 million euros, that doesn't mean a prospective buyer has to pay 40 million euros. They can obviously pay less. It's just more so something that needs to be in there based on Spanish law. So don't worry, everybody. Valladolid is not crazy. They're not trying to price them out. They're not asking for 40 million euros. I'm sure they wouldn't turn it down if they got anywhere close to that, but they are realistic in this case.
And like I said, as little as 5 million euros has been thrown out there, and that's a nice little profit for Valladolid, but it seems like he will be sold to the highest bidder. Out of those four clubs that I mentioned, Alex, is there one within the Liga? Because we have heard that there's some other clubs that are going to be playing in Europe next season that are interested, but the only names that we've seen right now, like I mentioned, Mallorca, Osasuna, Cadiz, and of course Getafe. Any one of those four clubs stick out to you as to where you'd like to see him go?
Yeah, I'd say there's two in particular. I just say because there's kind of a split, and I'd say the first one is Cadiz, just because they were so interested in him in January. They were very close. It seemed like an 11th hour kind of deal when Valladolid swept in and got Larin. So the fact that Cadiz had that interest already, probably saw how he performed, obviously, and if they still want him, I think that would be a logical shout. If not, Osasuna, I think would be a fun choice, just because they pushed all the way up to Europa Conference League. So for a guy like Cyle Larin, who had that taste of the Champions League a couple times, once with Besiktas and a little bit last year with Cluj, returning to Europe would be a nice move. And of course, staying in La Liga and a club like Osasuna, they did well despite not scoring a lot of goals. So a guy like Larin coming in and helping them, they had 37 goals, which amongst teams in the top 10 is pretty much the lowest. So a guy like Larin coming in and giving them more goals would be a big difference maker.
Yeah, Osasuna is the one I'm looking at mainly because it does make sense for them. They're going to be competing on two fronts. Going to Europe, they're going to maybe want someone who can prove that he can put the ball in the back of the net like that. I think Cyle Larin would be a good fit there. I think that they're a very well-run club. They should be able to, despite juggling two competitions, still have a decent finish, so he's not fighting relegation like he did this season. Peter, quickly, any of those four stick out to you?
I'm with Alex. I'd say in order, Cadiz first, because they obviously showed the interest in him, but second to that, they need goals desperately, and they need a reliable number 9. And Larin can obviously provide that. He showed in the 5-6 months that he was in Spain that he can score at this level, especially when the system's tailored around him. I'm sure Cadiz would do that. That would be number 1. Osasuna would be second, simply because similar reasons in terms of they need another reliable goal scorer. They had a couple of guys who were flirting with 10 goals, but they didn't quite hit that mark. And obviously prorated over an entire season, Larin would have more than surpassed that and would have been among the top scorers in the league. So I would say those two teams. The factor also in Europe probably helps too, because worst case scenario, strikers get rotated in and out early in the season. Larin takes his chance. I know that it didn't necessarily work out at Bruges for similar reasons, but maybe a bit of a change in fortunes and knowing that he maybe has a bit more confidence could help.
Yeah, I'm hoping that as well because he's familiar with this league now. I would hope maybe the manager would want to give him an opportunity right away. But like you said, I mean, these transfers can always be a little dangerous when you make them. But I do feel a lot better about Larin making a move within La Liga than I did of him going to a brand new league, new system, new club, and seeing what will happen there. But we're having a little tendency right now to go towards players who don't exactly know what their future is going to have in store. And our next player we are going to focus on is Giulia Grosso, who she won the Serie A Midfielder of the Year. She made the Serie A Team of the Year, and she has been linked to numerous clubs. Alex, I'm going to throw it to you. How special was her season, and where would you like to see her potentially end up next season?
I think the wildest thing about Giulia Grosso's season, which is important to put in context, it was her first full professional season. She only played at Juventus for a half season last year before, rolling into this season. So in terms of debut seasons, the fact that you won the Serie A Midfielder of the Year, not, one of the top three or your nominee, you are winning the best midfielder of the year. You also make the Serie A team. They're the only Juventus player to make it. Obviously, Roma, Inter very heavily featured in that regard. Credit has to be given to Giulia Grosso, and she just showed so much, especially on the ball. I mean, finished with 8 assists, had 3 goals, was very involved as a number 8. Those are very, strong stats, but also defensively, she grew a lot on that side of her game. I think that's always the big adjustment going to the pro game is what do you have to do off the ball, tactics, defensive duties. And I also think she responded well, got a taste of Champions League. Because of all that and her age and her national team profile makes a lot of sense that teams would be looking at that, especially given that Juventus had a bit of a quieter season.
Now, Peter, we talked a little about this before we started recording here today, but we did mention going to England is probably the best opportunity for her. Give me 1 or 2 clubs where you think that she could be a good fit and why.
Oh, that's a great question. I would say, and here is the good thing. England is a very balanced league in that wherever she ends up, she's going to get minutes, whether that's at Aston Villa, whether that's at Tottenham, Arsenal, Man United. You can pretty much name your club, maybe save for Chelsea. I would say that would be the one exception just because Jessie Fleming fills a role currently. They have a couple of other players in those attacking roles and or those advanced midfield roles that would probably keep her out of the lineup. But any of those clubs I think would be a perfect fit, and the league in general will be a great fit because she is the perfect combination of strength, physical tools, as well as technique. And when you have all 3 of those qualities, then England is the league for you. If she went back to the NASL, it wouldn't be the worst thing, I guess, in terms of minutes. But I think having seen her blossom these last couple of years, she is probably a step above the NWSL right now.
Moving on to our Canadian quick hit section of the episode, we are going to start with Milan Borjan, who is leaving Red Star Belgrade after a very successful spell with the club. He won 6 league titles, 3 cups, and he will be going on loan to Slovakia with Slovan Bratislava.
Theo Corbeanu to Switzerland. It's looking possible. Grasshoppers are reportedly interested in loaning the Wolves star youngster, and this would be yet another loan spell. He has obviously had problems with consistency. We'll see if maybe Switzerland's the landing spot for Corbeanu to turn around his career. Ashley Lawrence looks to be set to be heading to Chelsea. PSG announced her departure officially, and she is expected to be announced as a Chelsea player very, very soon, so stay tuned for that.
There was a lot of speculation surrounding Aiden Morris and his international future. Canada was very interested in the player, but at the end of the day, Morris went with his heart and decided to represent the U.S. men's national team after accepting a Gold Cup call.
Former Toronto FC youngster Jaden Nelson is continuing to find his feet in Norway, as recently he's found a couple of goals. He started the season while was getting minutes, had some assists, but he scored goals over the last couple of weeks. Great finishes too. He's getting more involved in the final third, kind of playing as a winger, but sometimes tucking inside as he did at Toronto FC. So great to see his development with Rosenborg. Jordan Huitema can't stop scoring seemingly for the OL Reign these days with their feet, with their head. Everything's working right now for Huitema. She scored a thumping header over the weekend, up to 6 goals in all competitions. she is in great form ahead of the World Cup and is staking a great claim to get a starting role up from game one onwards.
That is all the time we have for in this edition of Canadians Abroad. I really hope you all enjoyed it, and if you did, be sure to tune in for next week's update.